Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, in the news this week, Catan, we could sum it up in two words: disunity and conflict. We have protests in France. People are protesting there over the gas prices and what they consider inequality. We also have a Ukrainian brawl in the parliament, of all places. We also see our own U.S. government openly disagreeing on several different things here. We'll talk about that. And also Russia test-fired their latest hypersonic missile, which is capable of a nuclear warhead on it. And the U.S. is a little bit concerned about that because they do not yet have that technology. So these stories and many more. But first, we'd like to inform you that the people of Indonesia are experiencing the disastrous effects of another tsunami. Now, if you remember, Catan, we reported about the earthquake that affected the city of Palu and its surrounding area, and that was in late September, causing the death of 2,256 people. Now, that was in the northern part of Indonesia.
Wow. This time, the western islands of Sumatra and Java were caught completely off guard when a tsunami with waves as high as 12 feet hit the shores surrounding the Sunda Strait. Without warning, the wall of water swept people out to the ocean, causing 429 deaths at last count.
Unlike most tsunamis, which are caused by earthquakes, this most recent tsunami was created by the Anak Krakatoa volcano, which has been erupting for months now. Now, the latest eruption caused a portion of the volcano to collapse and create an underwater landslide, which in turn formed the wall of water that crashed into the two neighboring islands.
Wow. Now, there is no warning system for such tsunamis, and because the volcano continues to erupt, people there are fearing more could take place at any time. The grim task of recovering bodies is underway, as many are washing back ashore. Searchers are using sniffer dogs as well as drones to help find bodies and see the extent of the devastation. While the majority of Indonesian people are Muslim, there is a small percentage of Christian believers who are headed to church not to celebrate Christmas Eve, but to mourn the dead and the missing. And it seems like that area right there in Indonesia, it seems like they just can't catch a break from either earthquakes or tsunamis. They've been, in the last at least 14 years, been hit with at least 3 to 5 tsunamis and several earthquakes in that area, and it's created a lot of devastation for the people and the land and the businesses and homes in that area.
Right, and those haven't been small by any scale. I mean, several of them very large with a lot of devastation.
That's right.
Well, President Vladimir Putin is boasting about Russia's latest military accomplishment, a hypersonic intercontinental missile which can be armed with a nuclear weapon and travel up to 20 times the speed of sound. Now, from a Moscow command center, Putin watched the hypersonic missile leave its launch tube and strike a target 3,700 miles away, declaring it invulnerable to intercept.
Wow. U.S. Strategic Command General John Hyten said, "We don't have any defense that could deny the employment of such a weapon against us." The Pentagon has acknowledged that America is vulnerable and is quickly developing its own plan to create an American version. Well, that's not very comforting.
Well, Colonel John Rafferty, Long-Range Precision Fires Cross-Functional Team Director, stated, "Hypersonics is a game-changing technology. That's why it's so important for us to embrace it." Now, when Colonel Rafferty was asked how far are we from actually fielding that technology, he responded, "So I think we'll put a hypersonic system in the field before 2023. So Russia has theirs now. U.S. is saying hopefully by 2023, 4 years away. That has to leave a little bit their nervousness knowing that they have this technology, but the U.S. does not.
Right, walking on eggshells until they get that thing ready to launch. Well, retired General James Stavridis expressed the necessity for this technology by saying both offensively and defensively, the United States military is working very hard on hypersonics. We are in an arms race.
Well, for the first time since the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is replacing cabinet members. With increased pressure from the United States, former finance minister Ibrahim al-Assad will now leave the foreign ministry, replacing Adel al-Jubari.
This restructuring was going on as President Donald Trump was returning from a surprise visit to troops in Iraq. There, the U.S. president, speaking to a military crowd, said that the U.S. will be watching ISIS and Iran as the troops return home from Syria.
Now, in his address, President Donald Trump said there will be a strong, deliberate, and orderly withdrawal of U.S. forces from Syria. Very deliberate, very orderly, while maintaining the U.S. presence in Iraq to prevent an ISIS resurgence and to protect U.S. interests, and also to always watch very closely over any political reformation of ISIS. Now, also to watch over Iran, he said, will be watching.
Well, reports are also circulating that thousands of forces will be pulled from Afghanistan as the government and Taliban look to strike a peace deal.
Well, the Israeli police have published a report accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Now, the report stated Netanyahu's involvement with Shaul Elevich, the biggest shareholder of the Israeli telecom giant Bezik. Now, the accusation is that Netanyahu and Elevich were in a quid pro quo relationship, which is Latin for something or a favor in return for a favor. And again, with the Prime Minister here, Benjamin Netanyahu, this isn't the first time we reported of these type of dealings and him taking the bribes and and other things in the government that he was being accused of. Right. So this is falling right along those same lines here.
Yeah, and it seems as though a lot of people are losing trust for him as a result. Because Netanyahu was leading the communications ministry, it is thought that he gave the Bezik Group regulatory benefits outside the law. In return for benefits, Netanyahu and his family were offered positive coverage on the Walla News website owned by the telecommunications giant.
Well, those watching the story unfold say that this is a sensitive time for Netanyahu since his military affairs minister Avigdor Lieberman resigned over the truce with Gaza, which almost resulted in elections being moved to an earlier date. However, for now, Netanyahu has some time, but he is under severe scrutiny.
Israeli media researcher Ismat Mansour told Press TV the recommendations are submitted to the Attorney General and he decides on the indictment. It will be a long process, but the timing of the police report is very sensitive for Netanyahu, who wants to avoid having such accusations raised in the time of us speaking about early elections. He wants to keep his control over the coalition, to keep in power, but this issue might put his coalition in a crisis again.
While Netanyahu denies any wrongdoing and has no intentions of stepping down as prime minister, some think this is just to buy time before a trial. Jihab Harb, an international affairs analyst, told the press Netanyahu is known for his maneuvering tactics, just as what he did in managing the latest coalition crisis and during his investigations and dealings with the police.
Mr. Harb ended by saying he wants to keep all of the coalition together because it offers him control and influence. However, I believe that once Netanyahu is taken to court, it will end his political career as the longest serving prime minister.
Well, we're now going to turn it over to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who's been covering several stories for us, including the riots in the streets of France to the fighting in the Ukrainian parliament. But first, there is an international conflict going on between the Palestinian government, or in the Palestinian government there. Larry, what is the latest here on this conflict here with the Palestinians?
The waves of rage surging among and within the nations is also present in the Middle East. A big issue now surfacing is a conflict between Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas. President Abbas recently took action to dissolve the Palestinian parliament, and it is the opinion of Hamas that the move will erode public confidence and produce chaos. Typically, the government's parliament changes only after elections, but Abbas has opted to break up the assembly prematurely and is calling for elections in 6 months. The tide of conflict is also sweeping through France. The nation's government is in a violent struggle with its people, who have reportedly risen up due to overtaxation and poverty. Please have a look. While initially the country's president, Emmanuel Macron, dug in and swore not to concede to any of the demands of the nation's protesters, who have become popularly known as the Yellow Jackets after their yellow vests, the leader is now being reported to have made certain concessions. But rather than placating the protesters as the leader might have desired, the move is said to have emboldened the Yellow Jackets, who have reportedly set their minds not to settle for less. National Assembly member Gillard Collard stated for reporters that he believes that the French government is attempting to play the people of France for fools, and that the concessions are actually a ploy to buy the government time to host the 2019 European parliamentary elections free from violence. The Assembly member says that the move is a mockery and believes that French democracy is in shambles, and that at this point, the nation does not have a parliament, but a disciplined, authoritarian majority, he says, that does whatever President Macron says. Spain is also awash with unrest in Catalonia. At least 11 people have been arrested and 32 injured in Barcelona, with the largest share of those injured being police officers. Protesters are said to be in disagreement with what they believe are divisive and separative efforts to establish Catalonia as a separate and independent entity of Spain. Government officials were hoping that the protests would take place in a peaceful manner, but protests are seldom that, and the latest uprising in Spain was no different either. Hands were waving to plead for a stop to the violence that recently surged through an assembly in Ukraine. The session came to blows as insults among the different parties went too far. Have a look.
Колеги, припиніть, зупиніться. Зупиніться, я скажу. Колеги, зупиніться. Я прошу зараз, я ранкове засідання оголошую закритим. Я оголошую перерву і прошу зупинити конфлікт. Старший по званню, зупиніть конфлікт. Зупинили конфлікт в парламенті українському. Прошу зупинитись. Дякую, колеги. Ще раз вітаю з важливим і великим рішенням. Вітаю вас, колеги. Ранкове засідання оголошую закритим. В 16-й годині всіх прошу зайти в зал для продовження. Зупиніться, я скажу. Колеги, зупиніться. Я прошу зараз, я ранкове засідання оголошую закритим. Я оголошую перерву і прошу зупинити конфлікт.
And such is the tumultuous state of international affairs and the surge of violence and hostility sweeping through every nation of our world. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, it said at a parliamentary meeting, they should be discussing and finding solutions to problems, and not actually needing a referee to break up the fights. But it's kind of, kind of makes you wonder how the people feel about the position of their leaders in solving, problems if they can't really work out just simple differences.
Right, and that was over a sign that they had. Imagine a real problem.
Yeah, exactly. Well, definitely could use a peaceful solution. A lot of parliamentary contentions have been in the news as members of Britain's parliament have been going tit for tat regarding the planned Brexit deal, as well as some supposed words one of the members of parliament, Jeremy Corbyn, the opposition leader, spoke under his breath regarding UK's Prime Minister. Well, during the accusations, there was a lot of verbal outbursts of disapproval. And as the Speaker of the House tried to direct order and remind members that points of order should be presented and responded to in an orderly fashion, they kept continuing to overspeak him.
Well, but he was continually interrupted time after time, and when Corbyn was given the floor, he spoke in his defense that he didn't refer to the Prime Minister as a stupid woman, but said stupid people in regards to the chaotic handling of the Brexit issue by members of the Parliament. Now, of course, there was still outbursts as both parties went toe-to-toe verbally over seemingly trivial matters.
That's right. At least they didn't break out in a fight. Secretary of Defense James Mattis was forced out of office 2 months earlier than planned by President Trump. Well, this comes 4 days after Mattis's resignation over the president's decision to pull all U.S. troops out of Syria, along with the second person in that same office who also resigned for the same reason. This is all taking place in light of a partial government shutdown that could go into the new year. Mattis's resignation letter questioned the president's commitment to U.S. allies in Syria and said that the 2-month time was necessary to ensure that the department's interests are protected.
Well, this turmoil is on top of the turmoil of the continued partial government shutdown. Now, Mick Mulvaney, the incoming acting White House Chief of Staff, said regarding the shutdown and the president's decisions, he said, "This is what Washington looks like when you have a president who sort of refuses to go along to get along."
Interesting. Well, continuing in Washington, the president and House leaders Pelosi and Schumer met in a press conference, and this was prior to the government shutdown there, as we're going to see here. He says, you're going to see in this video, everyone is definitely not on the same page as they discuss the border wall, and they also discuss matters concerning the partial government shutdown or the government shutdown. And you're going to see, I want you to pay close attention to what President says regarding this border wall that he's been lobbying for and saying that if I don't get this, the funding for this, then I'm just going to shut the government down. And he mentions how Israel, he uses that as an example, and how they have that border wall between them and the Palestinians. And he says, it's very effective, but then in the same breath, he mentions how it's defective. So anyway, pay attention and listen closely to the first part as he compared how Israel's wall was doing its job.
If you really want to find out how effective a wall is, just ask Israel. 99.9% defective. Then our wall will be every bit as good as that, if not better. We may not have an agreement today. We probably won't. Chuck, did you want to say something?
Yeah, here's what I want to say. We have a lot of disagreements here. The Washington Post today gave you a whole lot of Pinocchios because they say you constantly misstate how much the wall is built, how much of the wall is built, and how much is there. But that's not the point here. We have a disagreement about the wall, whether it's effective or not. Not on border security, but on the wall. We do not want to shut down the government. You have called 20 times to shut down the government. You say, I want to shut down the government. We don't. We want to come to an agreement. If we can't come to an agreement, we have solutions that will pass the House and Senate right now and will not shut down the government, and that's what we're urging you to do. Not threaten to shut down the government because let me just finish, because you can't get your way.
The last time you shut it down, you got killed.
Let me say something, Mr. President. You just say my way or we'll shut down the government. We have a proposal that Democrats and Republicans will support to do a CR that will not shut down the government. We urge you to take it.
And if it it's not good border security, I
It
won't
is
take
very
it.
good border
And if it's not good border security, I won't take it.
It's
60 people of the Republican Party are losing their offices now because of the transition. People are not at the morale.
And we've gained in the Senate. Nancy, we've gained in the Senate. Excuse me, did we win the Senate? We won the Senate.
when the president brags that he won North Dakota and Indiana, he's in real trouble.
I did.
Let me say this.
We did win
Let me say this.
North Dakota
This
and
is the
Indiana.
most unfortunate thing. We came in here in good faith, and we're entering into this kind of a discussion in the public view.
But it's not bad, Nancy.
No,
It's called transparency.
I know. It's not transparency when we're not stipulating to a set of facts and when we want to have a debate with you about saying we confront some of those facts without...
You know what? We need border security. That's what we're going to be talking about, border security. If we don't have border security, we'll shut down the government. This country needs border security. The wall is a part of border security. Let's have a talk. We're going to get the wall built, and we've done a lot of wall already.
One thing I think we can agree on is we shouldn't shut down the government over a dispute, and you want to shut it down. You keep talking about
The
it.
last time, Chuck, you shut it down.
No.
And then you opened
20
it up very
times.
quickly. And
20
I don't want to do what you did.
20 times
Chuck.
you have called for, I will shut down the government if I don't get my wall. None of us have said...
You want to know something?
You've said
Okay,
it.
you want to put that on
You've
my...
said it.
I'll take it.
Okay, good.
You know what I'll say? Yes. If we don't get what we want, one way or the other, whether it's through you, through a military, through anything you want to call, I will shut down the government.
Okay,
Absolutely.
fair enough.
And I
We
am
disagree.
proud, and I'll
We
tell you what,
disagree.
I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck, because the people of this country don't want criminals and people that have lots of problems and drugs pouring into our country. So I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it. The last time you shut it down, it didn't work. I will take the mantle of shutting down. And I'm going to shut it down for border
But we
security.
believe you shouldn't shut it down.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Well, and as you mentioned, Don, that was prior to what we have a result of that meeting, a partial government shutdown, which is really affecting a lot of people. We don't know how long it's going to continue, but, certainly when decisions are made and, people are affected by it. When leaders don't get along, there is a lot of people that are affected, and this is just one example.
Yeah, and sadly, like you said, a lot of people are affected. It's not necessarily the leaders who are affected because a lot of those people are still receiving their paychecks. It's, hundreds of thousands of people who work in contract for the government who are worrying about where their next paycheck is coming from and if they're going to be able to continue to pay their bills, feed their families, have a house to stay in next month.
Tough situation.
Yeah.
Well, the president also spoke to the troops in Iraq during a surprise visit. Now, he spoke on topics of how the U.S. would not keep fighting for every nation on earth without being reimbursed. He said that if they want the American military help, they would have to pay a price, and sometimes that's also a monetary price, so we're not the suckers of the world. Now, he also admonished the troops, reminding them that we're respected, again, as a nation because of their hard work.
Well, in this next video, notice the concerns of a working mother and teacher who is also a speech pathologist and contracts her work with different schools and agencies. Now, her activism started when she was asked to sign a contract stating that she wouldn't boycott Israel as that was against that particular company's hiring policy. Well, here's her response. Here's her story.
I never thought I would be forefront for an issue or for a cause. I'm not a major activist, no. I'm not. I'm a busy mom of 4 kids. For me, it was like an opportunity for me to do something because my kids were watching me, first of all. And I always tell my kids, when you see something wrong, you have to fix it. I'm a speech language pathologist. I have been contracting with Pflugerville Independent School District for about 9 years now. What was unique about my position was that I spoke Arabic, so we were able to correctly evaluate kids who came in with Arabic as a language. I love my job a lot. I've always wanted to be in a job that was in the service field because I know I'm making a difference. This year, I got a new contract with new compliances, and I came across one that shocked me. The point of boycotting any products that supports Israel is to put pressure on the Israeli government to change its treatment, the inhumane treatment of the Palestinian people. Having grown up as a Palestinian, I know firsthand the oppression and the struggle that Palestinians face on a daily basis. You know, I have to set an example for my kids. We got to stand up for what's the justice and for right and equal opportunity for everybody and humane conditions. And so for me, it was an easy decision in that aspect. I could not sign it. I was forced to depart from my job because I will not sign it, and I cannot return back if I don't sign it. I have been here in the States for over 30 years. I'm an American citizen. I follow the law, and so I have the luxury of having these rights, which many people in other countries do not have. It infringed on all my principles. And on top of that, my right to speech and also right to protest. It's baffling that they can throw this down our throats, and decide to protect another country's economy versus protect our constitutional rights.
Katan, that's interesting how you'd think a job here in the United States, how it's amazing to me how far that contract, reached out there into a totally different part of the world, and yet she, was made, or, she didn't sign it, but was almost being forced, if she wanted to keep her job, to sign that contract. So interesting that those contracts can have so many different things in there, and if you don't read all the fine print, that's sometimes how people miss it and get themselves in a bind.
Yes, have to be very, very careful.
Well, just how widespread do the tentacles of the U.S. military reach throughout the world? We'll take a look at this next video to see how things began and where we are today.
Early in the history of warfare, man learned that the best formula for victory was compounded of striking power, mobility, and self-protection.
The U.S. is easily the most powerful country to have ever existed, and it certainly spends more on its military budget than any other country does today. That's all pretty well known, but less well known is the fact that the U.S. has around 800 military bases around the globe. This map can't even show that many dots. These are just 200 or so dots to give you an idea of where these bases are clustered. These bases are everything from massive military compounds to small airstrips in the middle of the ocean. If you combined all the foreign bases that every other nation has outside of its own borders, you get a total of about 30. There's never been a country with such a massive global presence. And the big question is, how did these bases get there in the first place? And how much is it costing US taxpayers to keep them open? Most of these bases cropped up after World War II, when the US set up in places like Germany and Japan to help maintain peace after an era of intense global war.
But we cannot expect these people to discard Nazi ideas with the casual air with which they abandoned their uniforms. Slowly, steadily, they must be taught the fundamentals of democracy. Slowly, steadily, they must be taught the fundamentals of democracy. Our task is to supervise this training in democracy.
Even though these countries are now stable, robust democracies and allies, the US still has 50,000 troops in Japan and 54,000 in Germany. The Korean War brought an influx of American infrastructure into the Korean Peninsula, where we now have 28,500 troops stationed. The Cold War made the US expansion to every corner of the globe imperative to US strategic goals.
Here in Russia, you see the reason why we are spending billions of dollars in defense production. Why your family is paying the highest taxes in our history.
But even now that the Cold War is over, there's not a place on Earth that's not still covered by US military influence. This includes everything from naval compounds like those in Guantanamo Bay, to small drone bases like those in the Horn of Africa, to little-known posts in the middle of the Indian Ocean like that of Diego Garcia. And it's not cheap. Keeping US foreign bases open costs taxpayers between $70 and $100 billion per year. That's more than any other government agency receives in taxpayer money, besides, of course, the Department of Defense itself. Taxpayers pay between $10,000 and $40,000 more per soldier stationed abroad than they do for those stationed here domestically. But this cost seems to be worth it to most lawmakers. The idea that US military leadership provides an indispensable stability to the globe is now a fixture of our global strategy and our foreign policy.
American leadership is not just respected, it is required.
So over the past 70 years, the US has set up bases all over the world in response to threats, and then they just never left. These 800 bases around the world represent a massive system of military power that isn't often talked about. And it's us, the American taxpayers, that are financially supporting this. We have all decided that it's worth it to pump $100 billion out of our economy to keep these bases open on the far corners of our globe.
Wow, over 800 U.S. bases. And if you remember, just a few weeks ago, we mentioned how some of the top military analysts were saying that if the U.S. got into a war with China and Russia, that they would likely lose because while China and Russia are focusing their interests at home, the U.S. is so spread out, and they're spread thin, so to speak, because they're involved in so many different parts, as we just showed there, having 800 or over 800 bases, where all the other countries have like a total of 30. So that you can see now how that would take away from the strength of the U.S. military, even though the U.S. military is very strong. But now you see how it's kind of changing, and they're saying that the U.S. needs to be careful. They might lose.
Yeah, and that kind of is a contributing factor to the reason why the U.S. military budget is so much. It's the largest budget, surpasses all the other countries that have, and industrialized countries that have militaries combined. And of course, as we just heard Stavridis say concerning Russia and their hypersonic missile, with all that money being spent, there's still a way that countries can get in beyond our defenses and strike us. So, it's evident that, all of this preparation for war is not preventing other countries from making war, but it's also not bringing about peace. And even though the U.S. does have military bases spread throughout all over the world, one thing that's interesting is that the efforts for peace is spreading throughout the world as well. That's right. Yisrael Hawkins and the House of Yahweh are bringing forth the message of peace from the House of Yahweh, and he's been teaching it for over 50 years now. To learn more about what you and your family can do to learn about peace and to start following the lessons that will turn your life around and get you out of this way of war, this mentality of war, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copies of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter.
Well, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas, 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You could also visit our website at YPNnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you could do so by emailing info@yahweh.com. For any international calls, please call the number that's on your screen now. And once again, don't forget the two programs, excellent Bible study tools, the Yisrael Says program by going to YisraelSays.com and the Ask Yisrael program by going to AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.